Odysseas has had a meteoric rise, showcasing the power of self-education to become a modern Renaissance man. His secret weapon has been to learn and write using Obsidian, which is the app he's personally crowned as the king of learning tools. But I question, is his advice also fit for the throne? This is because of two major criticisms I have. First is his credibility. Is he really staying true to promoting proper self-education, or is he actually hindering it? And second, from my 3 years of experience with using Obsidian for the same reason, I feel like his advice is outdated, oversimplified, and doesn't showcase Obsidian's true potential. So instead, I'll be critiquing and improving his setup later in the video. To be clear, I respect his overall efforts for helping people explore their curiosities and follow their passions. In fact, I also have a similar journey. Reading the book How to Take Smart Notes ignited my obsession with linked note-taking, which is why I fell in love with Obsidian. The app has helped me tremendously for exploring my wide range of interests, beyond the traditional constraints of formal education, by reading books and learning from online role models. And because of my unique blend of interests, I've had special opportunities I would have never imagined was possible 3 years ago when I had first started on this journey. In my first year of university, I felt restricted and unfulfilled learning from my computer science courses, but self-learning gave me the programming skills to intern at small startups and even a Global 500 company. During that time, I also began creating my personal brand. I created videos, templates, and paid products for sharing how I used Obsidian for learning and productivity. And recently, I've even joined as a product manager for Linking Your Thinking, the leading organization exploring the potential of this thinking method. Despite having no formal training in any of these areas, I've created my own learning path to explore these opportunities by following my curiosities and passions. But as much as self-education has empowered me to do all this, there's also an equal dark side to it. And that is why I am making this video. Self-education is only as effective as the information you're exposing yourself to. It can be dangerous if you aren't critical on who or where you're getting your advice from. I personally evaluate this for myself based on whether they uphold transparency and integrity. Unlike professors where they've been qualified to teach students, anyone can give advice online. How are you supposed to know whether they are credible and give their advice for your best intentions instead of for chasing external metrics like money or fame? When you have thousands listening to your advice and you speak with authority and extreme claims, how can people know whether you should be trusted? This is where I feel that showing your work is crucial to back up your claims and promote this transparency, to show how you're actually applying what you teach beyond these cherry-picked examples and polished videos that might not be as realistic for the viewer's needs. But from what I know, the advice he's sharing in videos like creating atomic notes or mini essays aren't published anywhere except his videos telling you how to do the same, and only recently so in his weekly newsletter. Another question I have is his integrity for letting viewers continue their self-education. He has suggested people read How to Take Smart Notes for people who want to learn more about the zettelkasten method, but what about Obsidian? The beauty of a personal knowledge management system is the ability to personalize it to your own needs. What resources and ideas did he learn and take inspiration from that viewers can explore themselves? Don't just tell me what to do, tell me how you came to the conclusion so I can find my own or even go further. From my perspective, he could have easily mentioned a lot of relevant ideas and resources that dive into these topics in greater detail mentioned in his video. For example, in the video, you talk about how you tag the development of your tags based on a baby, child, adult tag system. If I want to learn more about growing my notes and search this up online, I'm not going to find any relevant result. Instead, I'll end up seeing advice on how to be a good father. Unfortunately, I'm not ready to be one at 20 years old. In my own experience, the first thing that came to my mind was Andy Masuchuk's idea of evergreen notes for growing your own forest of ideas. This has similar stages for developing your notes and much more information and nuance related to it. Next, how can I learn more about these index notes you have in your vault beyond the one you gave in your video? Should you mention that this was inspired from maps of content, which is what Obsidian users usually call these higher order notes? Lastly, why did you end up only settling for status and tags for what to include in your note templates? Was this inspired by someone else's setup? How does this compare to other zettelkasten videos that exist? When I watched your video, I thought of Brian Jenks's full comprehensive tour, since that was my personal reason for adopting those principles in my own setup. Now, I'm only being critical about this because it's something that I've been reflecting on in my previous content. I can easily point out the same arguments in some of my videos as well, and have been trying to think and answer these questions to become a more credible creator. But thankfully, since you're watching this yourself, Odysseas, I'm not actually sure how to pronounce it. If you feel my points are valid, here's the simplest solution I've found for sharing your real-life examples and extra learning resources, which I'm sure your viewers would also greatly enjoy. The solution, drumroll please, publishing your notes online. There are free ways to do so, like using Quartz, or easy ways, like the built-in Obsidian Publish feature that also financially supports the team that works on this software. If you want examples on what this could look like, here are two creators with published notes that I respect and admire. First is Nicole for sharing her 10,000 plus notes from books, conversations, and even paid courses. She has been my personal role model for learning in public. Second is my good friend Aiden. I heard he was one of your own inspirations for getting into Obsidian, and if you found value in his content, I'm sure other people would also benefit from knowing about him. Whenever I'm curious about any of the ideas he mentions in his videos, even if he doesn't explicitly share the source, I can just visit his notes and do my own exploration. But anyways, that was just the first criticism I had, which was more of a rant. The main one I feel like I have a bit more justification in talking about is the setup itself. I will admit it is helpful for beginners starting and shares important principles about how to use the zettelkasten method. But based on my past 3 years of using Obsidian, I think it's outdated and doesn't really showcase its key features or full potential. The simpler way he uses it feels like his workflow could be replicated in any other note-taking app like Logseek, Notion, or even Apple Notes. When I looked at the main app features he showcased in his vault, I realized most apps already provide these features, and I wouldn't even consider the graph view an important part for daily usage. In my experience, I feel it's more useful for YouTube B-roll than it is an essential feature for the thinking process. And so, this doesn't prove to me why Obsidian deserves to be crowned king if all of these apps have almost the same features. So, in this video, I'll share the criticisms I have with the setup and suggest simple but powerful changes you can make to see why Obsidian could actually be crowned king. And if you feel the changes I make are relevant to your needs, there's a free downloadable version of my upgraded version in the description. But ultimately, I recommend you think critically and further personalize it to your own needs. If you want, you can even explore the setup yourself and these ideas in my published notes at notes.johnmaverick.com. Anyways, I hope you can take these ideas into consideration, and as a viewer, I hope the resources that I've shared and will share throughout this video can be helpful for people who really want to continue their self-education. But that's enough of me rambling. I think it's time to start dissecting the setup. So, the first thing he talks about in his Obsidian video is his folder structure. And in his setup, he uses these 6 folders to organize the different types of notes in his vault. Rough notes, source material, tags, indexes, templates, and then main notes. I have no major criticisms since it makes sense to use folders to organize these types of notes since there's no way a note could be of 2 types. However, I think his folder structure for rough notes specifically could be further broken down, since it seems like he stores two types of notes inside. First are temporary notes, which I'm going to call fleeting notes just to stay consistent with the zettelkasten method. And he also has logs, like his writing word count for the day. My question is, if this would still be manageable if you had hundreds of log notes and hundreds of temporary notes. Would it be easy to navigate through and know which one's which, or would it just be more convenient to separate these even further? This is why my suggestion is to just create a new folder for temporary notes. So I'm just going to name this one 0 and then fleeting notes, and I'm going to put the temporary note in here and then rename this one just to log notes, or just logs in general. So yeah, now that we have a base organization method for the notes in our vault, we can see how we can start enhancing each one. But before I do so, I have to make a major change in the way he currently creates and structures these notes. In his setup, Odysseas uses this default note template for the different types of notes in his vault. Unfortunately, this is where I feel like his setup is most outdated, which is what motivated me to make this video in the first place. Do you have a guess at what it could be? It's actually almost everything. First, I'll go over the problem with all of these fields. Obsidian notes are at its core markdown files, and with markdown files, they can have special metadata fields, which are called properties in Obsidian. Instead of putting these properties like time, status, and tags in the content of the note, we can put it in as categorized properties for better organization. And beyond just visual aesthetics, you'll see why this is important soon. So to do so, we can create a new property with the command palette by pressing Command-Control-P and then searching up property, add file property, or we can also just use the hotkey, which is command and then semicolon. And then here, we can create the first one that he has, which is the created date. So I'm just going to type that in, and I'm going to change the type to date and time, since that is what he uses. So now, by setting this up, if we ended up needing to change the created date for some reason, we could always just click on this calendar icon and then change it to a different date. And if we go into source preview mode, it uses the ISO date format style, which is more recognized across other features of Obsidian. But of course, you might not always want to have to manually choose the created date every time, so we can just simply take his existing variable and put it in here and just add the T in the middle, since that will allow for this new setup. Actually, if you were to surround it with these quotation marks, then you don't get the error when you go back into live preview mode. Just this warning, but we can ignore that for now, because if we just create a new note again, insert the note template, we can see that the date gets calculated properly. So I'm just going to delete this, and we can just focus on the rest of the properties. So I'm also going to create one for statuses. Type in status, and I'm going to keep this as a text property type. And now we can also add tags. But unfortunately, the tags word is reserved for actual tags, so instead I will change it to links. And since you can have multiple links, I'm going to change the property type to list. Now I can get rid of these. And there we go. Our properties are now more compatible with Obsidian's features. Now, you might be asking, what does this help me with? If we go back, create another note, test note, and then import the template, we can see that we can just put in any value here. So in this case, just to keep it consistent with his setup, I'm going to keep my status as baby. And then for links, I can maybe link it to this note on we learned something new by connecting it to something that you already know. And maybe another link to the welcome note. So now, if I were to create another note, I'm just going to set up the hotkey just before I go insane. template. If we were to set the status of this note, previous values in other notes get suggested for us to use. And this is helpful instead of having to maybe retype the same thing over and over again. If you look at links, it also does the same for each link we created. But the bigger reason as to why this is helpful is for expanding the possibilities on how we can organize our notes using custom views, which I'll show later in the video. Anyways, to go back to the note template, I don't understand why we need the title in the note as well, as I feel it's just redundant, especially if you have this inline title at the top of the note. So I'm going to remove it from the template. And next up, I'm also going to remove references because I'll be showing a plugin that automatically adds this when you actually do have references to mention in your note. So yeah, this is still a very basic way on how to use properties. So if you want to get more advanced, you can go to this video that Danny made showing a powerful plugin called metadata menu. If I just show how I use it in my vault, I level up the different statuses by having different kinds. So if I go to one of my greenhouse notes, like this one, I can have different statuses based on the tags I use for the stages of my different notes, for my conceptual notes. But then if I go to something like my inputs for different sources I have, I can have a different status, which is more suited for this type of note. And on top of that, if I go to one of my projects, like my trip to Japan, I can, and if I want to specifically link to a certain type of note, like a goal note, I can click on this button and I will be automatically recommended all the goal notes in my vault instead of just any note I have. So yeah, if you're interested in that, you can check out this video to learn more. Anyways, that's all I really had for the templates. You can also obviously make custom templates for the different types of notes in your vault, but I feel like his setup is simple enough where you could just use the same one for each one. So I'm just going to be sticking with the main note template. I'm just delete the files we made earlier. But wait, you might be wondering, doesn't this go against his philosophy of not overcomplicating the vault by using so many plugins? Like, he only uses 2 in his vault, and you're already recommending 1 for such a minute, detailed feature. Well, by not using plugins, you're missing out on one of the most powerful aspects of Obsidian, which is the extra capabilities and personalization made possible that makes it stand out from other apps. I believe plugins should be used to help you solve problems or missing features from a use case of Obsidian. Complexity in systems aren't inherently bad if it allows you to better achieve your desired outcome. So, when you use a plugin, you should feel like it should be something part of the core Obsidian experience, not something that you have to try and somehow fit into your setup. So, in this case, if just simple properties like this is all you need, then you don't need to watch or implement this plugin at all. But yeah, that's all I have to say in relation to his templates. Now we can start improving the next type of note, which is his logs. What I'm most confused about is how these logs can be useful for the future. If there are more informational logs beyond just numbers, like logging your feelings, I can see how this can get the job done, since you could just have different headers for each day, and then type whatever you think or is on your mind. But with statistics, this doesn't give you a chance to actually visualize your writing consistency, in your case, or progress from a higher order view. What if instead you could set up trackers and graph to actually visualize this progress? For example, in my own vault, I have a writing habit that I keep track of, which lets me see how often I do meet my writing goal of 60 minutes. This is done using the Obsidian Tracker plugin. Whenever I hit over 60 minutes, in this case, it was all 0, but in these cases, it was over 60, it turns green. And I can see how long my streaks are. And instead of just a log note, I actually track these in my daily note. In my properties for my daily note, I have one called writing minutes, which I use to keep track of this. And to remember to write my amount of time spent every day, I have a section called trackers where I have an input field for inputting this value. And since I fill out my reflection section of my daily note every day, I can consistently keep track of my progress and efforts. If you want to set this up for yourself, inside the vault, I've linked my video and notes showcasing how I track my habits in Obsidian and set up my daily notes to do so. Anyways, that's all my suggestions for logs. Let's look at the next node type, which is sources, or source material in his case. Source notes are helpful because they let you separate other people's words from your own and let you easily know where certain quotes come from by visiting the note. Inside the vault, I have an example source note for the book How to Take Smart Notes, which contain my important highlights from the book. Unfortunately, if you want to reference or include one of these highlights in another note, how can you specifically mention this one or this one? I could theoretically just copy and paste this quote, but then I would have 2 instances in my vault, which I feel like is just bloating it. This also would not be effective for if you're just wanting to add a citation at the end of any writings or things you paraphrased. So maybe for this quote, I just wanted to paraphrase it to learning comes from being open-minded and questioning our beliefs. And then I want a way to reference this quote as a source of where I got this idea from. But then I can't just copy paste this quote, or else that's going to be the same problem we have where we have 2 of the same quote. And there's no way to make a link to it. In fact, I'll change this as a title of the note and then put this quote here for the example. And lastly, when I do reference a quote from my source notes into a separate note, I want to be able to see from the quote where I am referencing it. Yes, I could just theoretically use backlinks. For example, I can make a link to How to Take Smart Notes, and then in here, if I look at the backlinks pane and expand it, when I'm looking at the backlinks pane from this source note, I can see that the quote being mentioned here was this one specifically, but I feel like it's just too tedious to look for when you do have lots of quotes from your sources. So instead, here are some community plugins I suggest to potentially make the referencing process more efficient. For citations, I recommend the following 2 plugins to make the process easier. First is Copy Block Link. This will give you a chance to copy specific blocks rather than just headers, which can let you reference certain quotes from your source notes. So I'm just going to install and enable it. And I'm also going to set a hotkey for its functionality. So if I search up copy block link, I want to set this copy link to current block or heading command to Command-Shift-C as kind of a supercharged copy. Next plugin is footnotes. Shortcuts. This lets you create citations and references in a much easier fashion. So I'm just going to install this as well. And I'm going to also set up a hotkey for this one. Hotkey, seems like I forgot to enable it. If I click on this plus icon, I can then set this command to insert or navigate in auto-numbered footnote to Command-Alt-F. Wait, it conflicts with something. I'm just going to quickly update this. So then search will already be this one. Oops. There we go. So now to put this into action, instead of just having this copied quote and this link, if we wanted to embed this quote, we can just press Command-Shift-C. It will create a block reference and we can just simply paste it in here. But then this still isn't that informatory, so we can add an exclamation mark before we paste it, which then shows us the quote. Inside. It seems like there's a lot of extra space, so I will remove this. There we go. And then maybe for this one, we just wanted to reference it and not explicitly embed it. So in this case, we can just say this is the benefit of writing tools like the zettelkasten method. So now that we have a space in between the text and our cursor, we can just press Command-Alt-F, which then creates the footnote and then directs our cursor to the reference section of the note. So now we can just copy this. I don't know why it creates the block quote a bit under, so I'm just gonna copy it and then paste it in here. So now if I want to learn about where this came from, I can easily visit this. And in live preview mode, it gets rendered as an actual footnote. And going back to the reason why I removed references from the template earlier, if we go to footnote shortcut, we can add a header that these all go under. And in this case, I'm going to just call it references. So now if I were to remove this and then create it again, you can see that the reference header gets created. So I'm just gonna put it back. So yeah. So now with this setup, your future self or readers of your notes and outputs can actually trace your learning path. And now to tackle the problem from earlier to see how this quote is actually being referenced, we can just download a new plugin called Strange New Worlds. If we enable it and go back, it seems like we'll have to change the settings a bit, go to Strange New Worlds, and then we'll change the minimal required count to show order to 1. So now, if we go back to the note, okay, it seems like the badge only shows when the reference block ID is not on a new line after the line or quote. So I removed the quote syntax from it. And now I think if we were to actually copy one of these quotes, we can see that the ID gets put on the same line. And if we paste this somewhere, the badge now shows. So yeah, I found this useful in my own notes, since whenever I do want to revisit my highlights for a book, I can see where these quotes are actually being used. For example, this one is being used for a note on the pathless path, and then this one is being used in the application note I have for the book, highlighting my top 3 quotes from it. So yeah, I do have more suggestions, like customizing the source note to the way I have it to facilitate critical thinking, reflection, and action through my application notes. But you can just learn more if you are interested in my video I mention here on how I take book notes. But yeah, that's all I had to say for source notes. Now we can go to the next type, which is tags. In his setup, he talks about how instead of using literal tags to organize his notes by larger topics, like, for example, just typing learning at the top of this note. Wait, I just realized I didn't even use the template that he has. Command-Shift-S, there we go. So instead of using the built-in tag system in Obsidian, we can instead create a link to a note called learning. I already have this created, and then these notes are for the larger topics that these atomic notes could be related to. This is a good way to leverage the power of linked note-taking, but I do have a few things to note. Haha, note, haha, okay. Usually, if you were to create a new note here, like open-mindedness, if you open this and create it, it will be created in the root folder of your folder system. And to move it to the tags folder, he likes to go to this top right corner on the menu and chooses the move file to option. But alternatively, you can also just use a hotkey to do this. So we can set move current file to another folder, to Command Shift M, and then we can just hit the hotkey and then move it to tag. And as a side effect of the plugin we downloaded earlier, Strange New Worlds, we can easily see what notes are linked to these tag notes, even if they aren't created yet. So if I were to create another one, maybe on beliefs, usually you don't have this many links at the top of the note, but this is just for example. It's not even created, but you can see what notes are linked to it. But previously, to actually see this, you would have to look at the backlinks of the note, which might not always have been available. Or the graph view. But like I said before, I feel like this is more important for B-roll than actual usage. But yeah, tag usage is pretty straightforward. The bigger thing I would like to highlight is his index notes. Because in these indexes, you take your tags and you level them up by incorporating the different links you already have made to this note by organizing it into different headers. So if we look at his example, I'll just close this and I'll just switch it back to one tab. If you go to my changes and then scroll all the way down, we can see that in his learning note, he has these general headers, which then group the atomic notes he has made through his learning and reading. But my criticism with this is that it's just simply a table of content and is nothing revolutionary. The power of Obsidian is that beyond these links, you can actually add text as context for why you decided to make the link. By doing so, you help emphasize the meaningful relationship between the index note you're on, which in this case is learning, and the new note you're linking to. For example, the value of the note learning is priceless is dependent on the context at which you are linking to it from. Because if you wanted to make a index note on like valuable skills to learn, and then you link learning is priceless, there's going to be a different reason why you did make that link. And I feel like recording that significance and difference is important for actually adding nuance in your notes. So in this case, for one of these existing notes I have in the vault, we learned something new by connecting it to something that we already know. I'm just going to quickly add the template to this and then link it to learning. If we go back to learning, we can add context to why we do want to make this link. We could say, to easily understand difficult ideas, remember that we learned something new by connecting it to something we already know. And then maybe if I had an index for Obsidian, add the template. So now if I wanted to include that note as a link to Obsidian, because Obsidian does facilitate this idea of learning something new, we can say something like Obsidian facilitates learning new ideas because we learn something new by connecting it to something we already know. And this is the foundation of linked thinking. This concept of using notes to further link and connect and group your notes is most known as maps of content, like I mentioned in my slides earlier. This helps us navigate our notes related to this specific idea from a higher order perspective. If you want to learn more about this, I recommend just going to the source, the pioneers of this idea, by taking the 6-day primer to linking your thinking. But otherwise, if you want my personal understanding, you can head to my note specifically for maps of content. And you can even see my maps of content yourself because they are all published online. So yeah, as of now, this does work quite well for organizing our ideas conceptually. But as we continue to read and learn more, we'll end up with more tags and index notes that we have to manage. And when you have as many as I do in my own notes, search up my maps of content, I think you might need more than just folders to organize this. So the question is, how can you organize these notes in a more informational way and automated way? For example, what if you also wanted to see related information of each note, like how many links it has, and how many of those are outgoing from inside the note, and how many are links to the note, like backlinks? If you're ready to go deep, we can start making custom views. And this is where we can use the data view plugin. So I'm going to go into settings, data view, install, enable. And yeah, the possibilities are endless, but I'll just share the 3 most relevant use cases for his setup specifically. And the first case is to just set up custom views for the different note types he has in his vault. So for each type of note, we can add a view note to act as a meta index for this note type. So maybe for indexes, we can create one called indexes. I'm actually going to create a new note just to separate these. Views. Change this to 7 to keep the number consistency. And in here, we can choose what type of sorting or organization criteria we want to have, as well as choose which properties in the notes are relevant to show. I'm also going to create one for tags, and we can start with this one since it's more simpler. So for this one, we can just sort them by created date. So to create a data view query, we can just add 3 backticks, type in data view, and then we can say to show a table that shows fields like the ones that are in the main note template, like status and links. So we can just type in status and then links, and then we can only look for notes within the tags folder, just like so. So from, and then in quotation marks the name of the folder. And then we can sort it by the created date in the note in descending order. And we can also show this just for more information. So now if I change the status here, like maybe baby or links, set one to beliefs. If we go back, we can see those fields shown in the query, which isn't possible if we were to only make simple links like open-mindedness. And since this is automatically related to the folder, if we were to create a new tag, let's say another example tag, and then add the fields. If we go back to tags, we don't even have to manually organize these links. It automatically gets populated and displayed to have less friction in your vault. Next, for index notes, we can do something similar like I showed on how we can show the total links to each note. So then I'm too lazy to create the query myself again, so I'm gonna just copy paste it from my Twitter post and then go back here. Oh, that does not look good. I'm just gonna quickly fix the formatting, and there we go. So as you can see, this takes the total links just by calculating the total of the outgoing and ingoing links, and then labels it as total links. It also takes the outgoing links as another variable to show in the table, as well as the backlinks. And this will just be looking at currently all notes, but we can reduce it to just indexes. And then we can also set the sorting criteria to display these notes based on this total links count. And we can limit it to 50 because if you have hundreds of notes, it's going to slow down your computer when trying to render such a big query. So yeah, if we look at what it looks like now, we can see that all of our index notes are displayed. We can see which ones have the most links, and we can easily just visit it and see which ideas or concepts we're most attentive to in our learning pursuits. And the benefit of a custom note like this is that you can create more queries than just the ones I'm sharing. So you could just organize this one as a header where it's by total links, and then you could also do something similar like how we have in tags as another header. So by created date. And then we can just change this to indexes. There we go. We now have various ways to show these different types of nodes based on our needs. The last case I wanted to show the power of data view queries was for the note making process as a whole. Because if we have a lot of backlinks here, it might be hard to know which ones we've already included in the note with the specific written context and which ones we still might need to link to this note. Fortunately, we can just create a query to list out these notes. So if I were to do so, we can just type in data view. We can list out these notes. We can create a list of these notes, and these can be from any folder in the vault that is just shown, that is just calculated by typing the link syntax. And they should also not be already existing as outgoing links in this note, which we can clarify by typing this. And then if you want, we can also sort it by created date. So now if I exit this query, we can see that it doesn't show this note because it's already in here, but then Obsidian and this other note on learning does get shown in the results. And obviously you might not always want this, so instead you can add this as a template. So we can say not included links template. Too lazy to think of a proper title. And we can just include this into any note as needed. So maybe if we go back to this note, Command Shift S, not include links template, and then boom, it's here. And then once you include these links into the note, they will disappear from the query, like so. Yeah, I think that could already be an overwhelming amount of potential use cases for data view, so I'll stop there. Now comes the last part of the setup, which is permanent notes. If I'm going to be honest, I don't prefer his tagging of baby, child, adult. I'm here to grow my ideas in a note-taking app. I don't want to be a teen dad. Like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, I just find the evergreen notes metaphor to be much more intuitive and informational when trying to search it up for your own learning and to see how other people interpret the different stages of the evergreen notes process, since it is a common idea in personal knowledge management. Because in my case, if I go to my greenhouse, you can see mine here. I have seedlings, sprouts, and trees, and you can learn more in my evergreen notes note on it to indicate the meaning behind each stage. So then seedlings are just pure ideas, sprouts are ones where you are in the middle of developing it, and then trees are ones that are ready enough to be released into the forest and can be still eventually grown over time. Because of my usage of my evergreen notes, I also question why he doesn't believe it isn't important. Because in my vault, I think it's crucial for helping me know what I should be doing with each note. And when you have hundreds, you need to have systems like this to keep track on how to maintain your vault. Because then if you don't keep track, you might have like thousands of seedling notes and you wouldn't realize that, hey, I should probably spend more time actually developing these notes into trees And like I showed earlier, I do have another type of status, which is more for processes, like I do with my input notes, because with my input notes, I can keep track on what I haven't started, what I'm currently reading, what I'm taking notes on, or I'm still needing to process, and then what is actually finished. Furthermore, since I do have my greenhouse note, if I ever feel like I do want to develop some ideas, I can easily just come here and know which ones I should be focusing on and which ones are ready for development. And to create this setup for yourself, you can just use data view queries, as I've already shown earlier. So yeah, there's a lot more suggestions I have since I do have a complex system myself. But I believe that it is important that you just grow into your own personal knowledge management system based on your own use cases and needs. If you feel like these use cases I have mentioned are relevant to you, then remember that you can just always download this vault in the description. So yeah, if you are curious about what else Obsidian can be used for, aside from learning, like designing your life and productivity, you can check out my own published notes where I share my entire Obsidian setup and philosophy, which I currently call the Ultimate Starter Vault. And if you found this video helpful, feel free to like and subscribe for more content like this. This has been John Maverick. Stay mindful.